Welcome to Essentials for Adoption-Attuned Parenting, a podcast exploring how parents can best relate and connect to their adopted child. If you have adopted, or even if you are thinking about adopting, this is the show for you. Discover tips and tools for adoption-attuned parenting. This is the podcast for building a strong foundation for your adoptive family. And now, from growing intentional families together, here are your hosts, coaches, and adoptive parents, Susan, David, and Gayle Swift.
Hi, this is Susan from San Diego. Welcome to the Essentials for Adoption-Attuned Parenting. I'm so glad you could join us. As always, I'm here with my co-host, adoption coach, author, adoptee activist, and my colleague at Growing Intentional Families Together, Gayle Swift. Good morning, Gayle.
Good morning, Susan.
Good to be with you.
Oh, it's always good to be with you. I'm looking forward to our discussions today. It's sort of on the heels of this terrible storm that assaulted the west coast of Florida. So as our listeners probably know, many Floridians are digging out from under the devastation wrought by Hurricane Ian. At the time we're recording this today, it's 11 days ago. And it got me to thinking about how adoptive parenting is very much like hurricane preparedness in many ways, sort of thinking in terms of hope for the best, yet prepare for the worst. So let me expound on that a little further. If you live in Florida, you very carefully watch that cone of prediction to see where they think the storm is going to hit. It's essential to keep in mind that's just a prediction. It's a guess. Very likely it could take a very sharp veer and land someplace unexpected, which is what happened with this storm. So we did make some preparations for the storm just in case. It's because it would be naive and foolish not to make some preparations.
Gayle, I suppose it's tempting to believe in the accuracy of the landfall predictions, and that can maybe easily lull you into not preparing.
It happens all the time. And then you see people the next day waiting in line for 2 gallons of water that could have cost them 75 cents ahead of time instead of sweltering in the sun for 4 hours to get 2 free bottles. So yeah, it really does benefit you to prepare no matter what.
But tell me what this has to do with being an adoptive parent.
It's sort of like, if we remember back to when we were first thinking about adopting, we didn't, at least I didn't, my husband and I, expect that hard times would come our way, really. We thought, not our kids, it'll never happen to us. But in the reality of life is, it most certainly will. At some point, troubles will hit your family, and maybe it'll be the equivalent of a Category 1 storm. Unfortunately, maybe it'll be the equivalent of a Category 5. So it's certainly better to be prepared, whether it's a storm or with a very full toolbox, parenting toolbox. Because if we don't prepare, the devastation is absolutely sure to be worse, whether it's storm preparation or preparing to parent. Talk about this a lot in the podcast and in the blogs. Do you remember when you and Ken were first thinking about adopting? Did you anticipate big issues?
Ken and I thought about adopting children and raising them somewhat like we were parented, right? We were going to have time, we were going to have energy, and we were going to have love, to give. And I was not versed in and nor were other people at the time. We've learned a lot about adoption in the last 30 years. I wasn't well versed in how an adoptive family would be different or require different skills or preparation.
Absolutely. So my son is 37. So we adopted 37 years ago. And George and I were very naive. We were both trained as educators. We had a happy marriage for 14 years. Even before we got married, that if we wanted children, it would be via adoption. I had weathered ovarian cancer, so we'd seen some hard times and had some fairly good interpersonal skills. So we were all set to ride family life to success. Oh boy, we thought our kids would never have big issues. We knew how to parent. We could handle classrooms. We could handle a couple of kids. Turned out we were in for some mighty big surprises. Along the way, we learned a lot about adoption. And as you are right. Back then, there wasn't the idea of adoption competence, adoption complexity, etc. We hadn't anticipated some of the hard times we got to face.
It's definitely a must that we understand, as you mentioned, adoption complexity, adoption grief. There's a 7 core issues of adoption that was just coming to light 30 years ago. And our own adoption attunement parenting. And this helps prevents us making some unintentional, because no one goes into this saying, hey, I want to be a bad parent.
Yeah, for sure. I want to be mean.
Yeah, this helps prevent our making unintentional errors in our parenting strategies. I'll give you an example, and this is a one that we often use. But as high AQ meaning adoption attuned parenting or parents, we choose time in instead of time out. And that's simply to avoid retriggering our children's fear of abandonment and rejection.
And, when we were parenting our kids, that never crossed our mind. We used lots of time out for one of our kids in particular, who was more challenging, and that had repercussions. So I'm delighted that we understand adoption and adoptive parenting so much better nowadays. We know how to retrigger some deep issues for adoptees, and we understand how our language can be part of those unintentional triggers. So we learn to master adoption-informed language.
Well, you're mentioning languaging with intention. And in your blog, you talk about this idea of avoiding totally toxic phrases that cut deeply and that might permanently scar our children. So we want to consider the awareness of language boundaries. Look at it like a diabetic child, right? We would be vigilant about how much sugar they took in and know that their physical health depends on it. So toxic language can be as dangerous to an adopted child as sugar is to a diabetic.
For sure. And, all kids, whether they're adopted or born to us, they know how to push parents' buttons, right? Mm-hmm. Oh boy, they're really good at it. But it is absolutely essential for adoptive parents to be aware that no matter how hard they sometimes push, there are certain phrases that we absolutely cannot let our guard down and use. It's just a no-go zone because the damage they inflict is so intense. So are you wondering what some of those might be?
I actually know a few of them, but I want to warn you, these are definitely cringeworthy phrases.
Oh, they sure are. And, I'm very active on a lot of adult adoptee forums. And I can't tell you the number of them that report that their adopted parents said this to them. Sometimes maybe once, sometimes over and over and over again. The parents' intention wasn't to be cruel, but in those moments, they weren't thinking intentionally. They were thinking emotionally, and that rational part of the brain wasn't in gear. So, first one, I wish I'd never adopted you. Oh gosh, can you imagine being a vulnerable child and hearing that? Or if Dad and I had children, they'd never be like you. Cringeworthy, you're right. Mm-hmm. Adopting you was the biggest mistake we ever made. Ooh, I can't imagine recovering from that one. You should be grateful we adopted you.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm not your real mom and dad, but you're not my real kid either. Another doozy.
Yeah.
You're so weak or so unathletic or some other negative quality, not like a birth child would be. Or you're just like your mother, a loser, lazy, whatever.
Gayle, like you said, or I said, these are cringeworthy.
Mm-hmm.
There are 2 of those that I think our extended families might have said, like, or society or our culture. Like this one, you should be grateful we adopted you. This idea of gratefulness, right? What? Mm-hmm. And that's a whole nother topic. There's this idea that persists that adoptees should be grateful. And the other one is The comparison with the birth mother or birth father, I think sometimes when our families, our extended families, like cousins, maybe they have aunts, they have too much information, or
Mm.
and they presuppose that the adoptee is going to have a certain kind of a pathway based on, history or whatever. Those really stuck out for me because maybe parents aren't saying those cringeworthy phrases, but sometimes society does. So we got to be careful, when we're out there in the world. Got to be
Well,
mindful of the languaging, not only of your languaging, but other people's too.
and I want to piggyback on that is not only mindful, but when we see friends or family saying these kind of adoption incompetent phrases or cruel phrases, we need to speak up on behalf of our kids and not remain silent. Because if we choose silence because we don't want to offend a friend or relative, we're abandoning our children. We're not providing the support they need. And we're not insisting that friends and family respect our kids the way they deserve.
That is an important point.
And the other thing is, even if our kids are able to forgive us or our friends or our family members for saying these really excruciatingly painful things, they may forgive, but they will never forget. That will be part of their inner soundtrack forever. They'll keep replaying it. And in addition to the damage that replay can do, they have in their hearts the awareness that their parents at some level felt that way, that in some limited moment, hopefully not an extended period of time, their parents had these horrible thoughts or feelings about them, about their child. And as parents, I remember, for instance, saying some things I wish I hadn't said to my kids. They weren't as horrible as this, but they were pretty not very nice. So there's that lingering shame for us as well. So being mindful of our language benefits our kids and ourselves.
In your blog, you talk about just a very brief section about the shame that develops within the parent. And sometimes parents worsen the situation and allow that shame to morph into anger, which then they blame the child for causing the loss of control. So this is tricky. This only worsens the relationship break because it's inaccurate and lacks the parent's honest accountability.
For sure.
So that's a really hard pattern to break. So it's good to think about this before you might lose yourself in a temper tantrum.
I love that phrase that you use, a temper tantrum. We usually think of temper tantrums only in the sense of kids having a temper tantrum, but Lord knows there are plenty of adults that have temper tantrums, and the accountability piece is essential. So our coaching, our blogs, this podcast, they're all dedicated to helping adoptive parents really embrace and live adoption attunement, and to live and parent with that commitment to adoption attunement with the same intensity and care with which we love. Yes, love is essential, but education and awareness and intentionality are also essential.
You also talk about modeling healthy boundaries and understand the need for and the benefits of quickly repairing relationship breaks between ourselves and our children. And by doing this, so important, by doing this, we teach them how loving, respectful relationships work. And that provides them with a template to follow. Here's the thing. It takes a while to master this.
Oh, yeah.
So you need to be patient. And the other thing is that we're all human. So we might make mistakes or lapse back into a previous pattern that didn't work. So it takes time to figure out the mistakes and then, shift and understand, as I just said, that we might fall back. By the way, I love when you say, even if our kids prefer us to be perfect, we're not going to be. Perfect parents don't exist. I think there's a little extra pressure on adoptive parents going into it because of the way it's set up, and rightfully so. The home study and you have to meet requirements. You're going to all necessary. But here's the thing: it might set you up for thinking that you have to be really, really good or close to perfect in order to parent, and that's just not the case.
I think that's so true, Susan. And I also think that in our own heads, most of us are aware, we believe we are very fortunate to have our kids, and we're aware that their birth parents would have, in most cases, preferred to have been able to raise these kids. So we're aware of their loss, our gain, and this expectation of perfection serves nobody. But what does serve us, I'm going to recap back to what we said just a few minutes ago, is a willingness to be accountable, a willingness to declare that there's been a mistake or a breakdown made, and to quickly make that repair. I can't tell you how often in coaching families, I've seen parents be really reluctant to declare the breakdown and initiate the repair. And it's very powerful for building really strong, loving bonds when parents are willing to do that. And then in turn, as we said earlier, it provides this model for our kids so they can recognize as they grow up and go out into the dating world, for instance, that they deserve and should expect relationship partners that are also willing to be accountable and to effect repairs. You know, we don't want to set them up who expect bad treatment because that's how we treated them. You know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. Since I have kids that are older and they're in relationships, yeah, or they're thinking about longer term relationships, having experienced that accountability piece, that name it and look at it and do better and move forward and check in with them, all of that they're doing that with their people, with their relationships, in their relationships. So that piece is really important. And not only does it feel good in the moment, it'll feel better. I guarantee that, rather than stuff putting it under the rug or not saying anything about it. But not only do you feel better about it in the future, but you have that in the moment that you feel better. So there's a lot of motivation here to do this.
You know, we talk about metaphors. When we stuff that we should be handling, it's like being at the pool or the ocean or the lake or the river. It's a big beach ball and holding it underwater. You can do that for a while, but eventually your arms are going to get tired. And that ball is going to erupt with great force. It's all out there for everybody to see. Right. And not everybody, you won't be in the best frame of mind at that point. So I hope that our listeners will see that it is better to prepare for the storms of family life, to master these relationship skills, practice the elements of adoption attunement, of course, love and enjoy your kids, and then take comfort in knowing that you have fully prepared. Listeners, you have prepared, right? You are listening. So I'm guessing you're preparing. And then you can weather any storm when they come. You don't have to face these challenges alone, right, Susan?
That's right, Gail. The coaches, here we are. We're talking about it on this podcast, but also there's assistance out there. For instance, the coaches in our firm, Growing Intentional Families Together, are here to help you or provide you with help and resources, insights, and strategies that are particular to your family. And also, I have to say, we have decades of lived experience.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And we certainly have enjoyed the education and the knowledge of adoption that has benefited our families and other people that we coach.
Well, and you know what else I know, Susan, is my family in particular faced some really, really rough times. And what was very helpful for me was to know my colleagues in Growing Intentional Families Together who were able to help coach us through those difficult times. Because it's pretty terrifying when you feel like your family's falling apart. And the average therapist at that time was not as in tune with adoption complexity and the 7 core issues, et cetera, et cetera. So we were hard pressed to find helpers that were capable. So it's important to find, when you reach out to your resources, be sure they're actually informed, number one, and then reach out to them. It's too hard to do it alone. And that's when we fall apart. And when we fall apart, our families struggle even more.
That's very true. Gail, in your blog, you mentioned parents with teens might find Katie Natzker's book, Parenting in the Eye of the Storm. That's the title, Parenting in the Eye of the Storm. You might find that useful if you're parenting teen. This is interesting. I love this. She is both an adoptee and a therapist.
Right, right. So she has a lot of great lived experience there for sure. And, reach out and get help. You don't have to make it harder. And I'm going to harken back to our earlier comments. Don't expect yourself to be perfect and do it alone. Reach out, get that help. You don't have to be perfect, but you do have to be working your best to solve the issues.
So, Gayle, we've come to a close for today. I want our listeners to remember that these are our observations as coaches and as adoptive parents. And we know that each person and family are unique and their experiences may be different from ours.
They may be different, but we know for sure they're going to face some storms.
Yeah.
Prepare, prepare, prepare. So it is our hope, Susan, that they'll consider adoption attunement practices as a guide for parenting your adoptive family. Yes, ma'am.
And Gayle and I invite you to share your experiences with us. Go to Growing Intentional Families Together Facebook page and leave your comment. And we invite you to visit our website and read our blog. There's lots of great content in there, and you can subscribe also to our monthly newsletter.
We've got some good book recommendations there as well, Susan, and they're annotated, so it gives people an idea of what they're about. So tell us what's going on in your family and let's talk about it.
Gayle, I want to remind our listeners that we are in the process of creating a special new webinar series for those individuals who are just beginning to think about adoption as a way of creating or expanding their family. And this webinar series will answer the questions like, what do you need to know? Who can assist you? Things you need to know but didn't even know to ask about. And finally, a highlight, what you need to know about adoption from an adult adoptee and professional adoption coach who just happens to be mine and Gayle's colleague. Contact us at Gift Family Services to explore this possibility.
I think that covers it for today, Susan.
I'm Susan from beautiful and always sunny San Diego.
And I'm Gayle from an equally sunny place, Florida, the Sunshine State. And remember, adoption matters. Talk about it, read about it, learn about it. Till next time, so long.
Thank you for listening to Essentials for Adoption Attuned Parenting. If you liked the program, please leave a rating and review on iTunes to help us spread the message about building strong and connected adoptive families. If you'd like more information about growing intentional families together and their adoption coaches, as well as to sign up for your free coaching consultation, visit giftfamilyservices.com. We have enjoyed being with you and invite you to join us again next time for another Essentials for Adoption Attuned Parenting.